Lost the minister there. And moving away from that, I think one of the hottest story in Nigeria now is the threat of blackouts. Now, electricity supply conversation is not new in Nigeria, but when we hear that the federal government's intervention fund to the electricity distribution companies has risen to 2.9 trillion naira from 2 trillion naira recorded as of May this year, and yet we have the workers. I think if you did watch the news at 10 yesterday, you would see where the workers are protesting, the unions are protesting and threatening to cut supply from the supply to Nigerians from today. But by estimation, the 2.9 trillion naira is the total funding extended to the sector since privatization in 2013. And some people will ask, so what was the essence of that privatization? In November 2013, the federal government unbundled the power holding company of Nigeria, that's the PHCN, and sold 18 utility firms to private investors. But we know that recently some of those investors, some of those discos have had to be rescued by banks and even the government. So discussing the way forward now, that's what we want to do this morning with Femi Adeyemo. He's the Chief Executive Officer of Energy, Oil and Gas, and he deals mostly with alternative energy. So I guess if we cannot get enough supply from the national grid, why don't we look elsewhere? That's actually our focus this morning. So good morning, Femi. Thank you so much for joining us on the program.
Good morning, Nigeria.
Yeah. So I don't know if you've heard that Nigerians may not get supply from tonight if the Electricity Workers Union go ahead with their threats. I don't know, what's your reaction to that to start with?
I think for Nigerians that are able to get alternative supply sources, they will have electricity. And I continue to say the same thing. We cannot continue to do the same thing as a country and expect different results. So the government needs to just be willing for once and resolve the hydra-headed crisis that we have in our electricity distribution sector. That's the distribution, the generation, the entire value chain. We need a different approach. So I'm not surprised when I saw the news that the electricity workers want to embark on a strike. It's a sector that need some sort of disruption. Government is still holding 40% of the distribution companies, and I think that's where the bottleneck is. Government should let go of the 40% they still owed or own on the distribution companies and let market forces more or less take over. Nigerians are already paying more for electricity anyway. Diesel generators every nook and crannies of the country. So government should just let go. If private sectors operate, they see what we have in the telecom sector. Initially, it was more expensive, but now, I mean, everyone is fine, and we have human capacity that we've also been able to develop in that sector of the economy. So indeed, electricity is not rocket science, as one of the previous ministers had said, but it appears that it continues to be rocket science in our country.
I mean, you say government should let go, but even the distribution arm that the government let go of, I know you heard recently how, the banks and they had to come through again, so even the part that the government has let go of is not running smoothly.
I disagree with that, Ini. Even though, we have 60% ownership by the private sector, government still owns 40% of the distribution companies. And that's why investors that have the wherewithal, the technical competence, the capital that are excited to get into the market are not jumping in, because governments still have more or less undue influence on the distribution companies. As a matter of fact, where I sit, I have had investors, inbound requests, calling our organization, speaking to me in foreign conferences about the sector and the likelihood of governments more or less giving up the remaining 40%. So where we sit and in the sector, in the investment or investors ecosystem, it is not still 100% privatized. It's 60% privatized, and the 40% that the government owns, the undue influence is not allowing market forces to play, even in the distribution part of the value chain. And that's what is leading to the problem that we have today. And if we continue to do that, if we like, we should pray till tomorrow. We're still going to continue to get the same results.
So what do you say about expectation from the new Senate bill, from the Constitution amendment that could allow states and even private corporations to produce and distribute and not necessarily go through the national grid?
That's a step in the right direction. And I can't wait to see that executed. Because again, we are a country that our problem has always been on the implementation and the execution. It's not lack of policy. So this is a step in the right direction. I hope that we will be able to implement it. Where, as stated, each state can generate their own power. They can also distribute the power within their states. There are several opportunities globally. There are several investments and investors that are looking into coming to Nigeria. And this is one of such initiatives that can bring that to the fore. So I hope that indeed we will move beyond it being an act to really executing it, for the benefit of the entire nation.
Yeah, so I guess when we talk about that, then one is not restricted to the hydro to produce energy. So you have solar, you have wind, and we have abundance of all of this. But I guess even at this stage, if you go to a lot of homes have embraced some of this, but the overhead cost is really high, and that becomes discouraging. And then you see people go back to generator, and that, of course, with what it does to the environment, the noise, and even the cost of petrol and diesel at this time also comes into play. But I guess the overhead cost of embracing alternative sources of energy is also of a major concern in Nigeria.
Yeah, that's partially correct, especially for businesses or homes that want to acquire systems outright. And I think one of what we've also seen as a player, as an active player in that sector, is because of our culture of wanting to own things. In other economies, for instance, if you look at Australia, if you look at even a lot of states in the US, California, for instance, you have, several millions of solar deployments. But in most of these countries, people don't bother to buy the system outright. They opt in for leasing plan, or maybe even energy as a service plan. But I can tell you, we have companies like ours and a few others that have been able to raise capital to tell Nigerians that, you know what, you don't have to pay for that systems outright. You can either pay on a monthly basis, maybe over 5 years to own the system if you must own, or just even pay for the energy you use on a monthly basis. But what we've seen is there are still a good percentage of Nigerians that would prefer to own, even though the money is not in the bank to own. So my recommendation will be that Nigerians should look at leasing plans. Look for companies that can provide you long-term, mid to long-term, 3 to 5 years leasing plan to get your reliable solar solutions. It should not be anything less than with lithium batteries. If any company is offering you anything less than 5 years warranty, or maybe even more than 10 years on the solar panel, run. Because it might then be a case of, in a few years, just like you said, running back to diesel generators. So that would be my advice. Nigerians should look for companies that are able to offer them solar solutions on a leasing plan, because with that, it takes away the myth of maybe it might even break, or, as you said, the risk or the concerns or the blockers of the upfront cost, which of course we know that a lot of Nigerians might not be able to afford for a reliable system.
Yeah, but talking about affordability, even the plans you talk about, the takeoff plan is normally high. It's mostly in millions.
No, 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 no. I disagree in it. So it depends. It depends on, I mean, there are different systems for different cadre or category. So for instance, I give an instance, and I hope that I am permitted to mention company names. So for the
No, you're
Nigerians that
not.
are using I Pass My Neighbor generators, right? So there is the MTN Lumos there. That is the replacement to I Pass My Neighbor generators. What's the monthly fee? Maybe 8,000 naira or less, right? And upfront cost for, I mean, the sign-up fee for that is not up to 100,000 naira. So it's as there are systems, there are companies for every category of whatever diesel or petrol generators that Nigerians are using today. Of course, for Nigerians that are using diesel generators that must run their ACs and all of that, of course, there is company like Powers Energy that can do a direct replacement of a 30 kVA generator and say, you know what, diesel prices now it's a no-go area. But if you're already spending that money, instead of you spending 100,000, 200,000 monthly on diesel, let that money go into a leasing repayment for a solar solution that you would then own, maybe over 3 years, and then in the next 7 years after ownership, you don't have to pay anyone for diesel or buying diesel generator again. So again, I reiterate that there is a package or a solution for every Nigerian today. For Nigerians that want just lighting, there is green light planners, there is daylight there. So there is a solution across the value chain. And I just wonder when I still see Nigerians lamenting, because indeed, until the government is ready to really, and I'm an advocate of a good energy mix. I don't think the whole country should be on renewables, no. But with where we are in the country today, uh, more or less, it's like a racket. And I don't apologize for saying that, because we just continue to run in circles. And if we don't do anything different, we'll come back here in 10 years, in 2032, and we'll still be saying the same thing. God forbid. But
So you're saying that even these threats from the electricity union, well, shouldn't move anybody if at least majority of Nigerians had embraced this alternative. But I guess, as you said, we cannot put everybody in the basket at the same time. But we do have the rural electrification, from the federal government, which is also working on spreading this alternative renewable energy, especially to the rural areas. And I hear they're doing some work in those areas.
yes, Rural Electrification Agency they've done some fantastic work. But as you said, more is being done in the rural areas. And I have not been silent about this. We can spend hundreds of millions of dollars in the rural areas. We hope that rural urban migration will reduce. But unfortunately, it's not really having that much impact that we want in the city, where we have the teeming youths that needs to be gainfully employed, that needs to stay back at home, and then energize our economy and get the economy to work. Few weeks ago, the bankers committee were more or less lamenting because of all of their youths, their smart software developers that are leaving Nigeria in droves. Because a lot of these guys, they're at home, they need to be able to work, they do not have power. So if Rural Electrification Agency is spending most of the millions of dollars loaned from the World Bank in rural communities, I hope that we will have significant impact or ripple effects of that on the economy. So my advice, as much as I said well done to Rural Electrification Agency, I have always said that they need to look more in the urban. And conversations around maybe, it is disco franchise area or not, it is still a function of the will as a country. We need to have that will to make things work. Otherwise, again, we're just going to saying the same thing over and over, year after year.
Well, I guess the Rural Electrification Agency is looking at the rural because they believe that those in the urban can actually purchase, at least have the power, you know, to purchase some of those alternatives that are available to them, unlike those in the rural areas who hardly have that purchasing power to,
Yeah,
to acquire.
but the youths, I mean, the youths need the power to be able to help to generate more revenue for the country, because these are the guys that will pay taxes. So I am not saying don't do anything in the rural, but the way it is now, you see about 80 to 80% or more of the allocation and the focus on the rural. And I mean, by next year, I'll be 10 years in this sector. We've not seen the kind of impacts and catalyzation that had happened in a few other countries. For instance, in Nigeria, who used to work with Schneider Electric, that we started this together, he has moved to Southeast Asia. And we're having a conversation, and he was amazed with the amount of impact and the developments that Vietnam, for instance, had seen. And they started these movements to renewables far after we started in Nigeria. But they had the will as a country, you know. So again, rural, not saying we shouldn't do rural, but it shouldn't be a case of 80% when you are in a country where the grid collapses almost once a year, and we're still in this comatose of having to bail out these schools every now and then. That policy is flawed, and we need to go back to the drawing board and deal with it. If we continue to just window dress it, the workers will strike today, and then there will be a meeting at the round table. They might come back in a few weeks, but it will still happen again.
Yeah,
because,
but
we don't deal with it from the roots.
At least, I mean, from here now, we can expect maybe this new bill to bring a sort of a change, attract more investors, and see more funds go to the renewables and attract even more consumption in that area. And that would be good for our climate also. We're talking about environment and climate change and all of that. So eventually, it's a win-win.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, I am very, very hopeful that the acts that would allow the state to generate and consume their own power will again be implemented. That will be a positive one. And I continue to say that when it comes to power, government should, as much as possible, allow the private sector. If we did not allow private sector to play in telecoms, we would have still been where we were, maybe with just minor changes to the 400,000 lines we had in year 2000 or 1999. But we'll see where we are today. In emerging markets in Africa, government should let private sector do business and just be there providing enabling environment.
All right, Femi Adeyemo, Chief Executive Officer of Energy, Oil and Gas. Thank you so much for your time this morning.
Thank you, Ini. Thanks for having me.
So that's it, from energy to AFEX. That's what we'll do after the break. This is Business Morning on Channels Television.